Hi, I'm Natalie. My sister once told me I was too sensitive, that I took things personally. But last week, she handed me a cake with broken glass hidden inside, and no one in my family asked why. They asked what I did to deserve it. She smiled for the cameras while I stood in the shadows. They erased my name from the program, cropped me out of the photo reel, and handed my speech to someone else. But here's what they didn't know. I didn't eat that cake. He did. So, why did she do it? And what did she think would happen when the truth finally had witnesses? I hadn't even cut the cake yet, and I already knew something was off. The Belvedere Grand looked exactly like I expected it would. Picture perfect, overly curated, and just a little too polished to feel like a celebration. The kind of place where emotions are posed and filtered, not lived. I walked through the glass doors alone, heels clicking against marble, my name not announced, my presence not noticed. Not that I was expecting a grand welcome, but I did expect something. A nod, maybe. A glance of recognition. But no. Just the front desk clerk handing me a generic envelope that read, "Guest of the Bride." I turned it over. No name. Just Pwun's One. That was my name tonight. As I stepped into the ballroom, the scent of peonies, Isolde's favorite, hit me like perfume that wasn't meant for me. The chandeliers shimmered above, and the floor beneath gleamed like someone had wiped it clean of anyone not meant to be part of this perfect scene, including me. It's funny how being erased doesn't happen all at once. It's in tiny omissions that no one notices but you. A young woman wearing a headset, clipboard in hand, greeted me. "Are you with the bride's party?" "I'm her sister," I said, keeping my voice calm. She blinked, scanned her list. "Ah, table 16, in the back corner, near the service entrance." I walked across the room, weaving past photographers, tall centerpieces, and a sea of pastel dresses that probably cost more than my rent. Table 16 was partially blocked by a pillar, the kind of spot you gave to someone you wanted to include, but didn't want visible. A woman in her 40s, holding a champagne flute, smiled at me. "Are you part of the staff?" I didn't answer. I just sat down and folded my napkin across my lap. This wasn't an accident. It was choreography. I glanced around the room and spotted Isolde, glowing under the spotlight. Of course, there was an actual spotlight. Her dress was champagne silk, custom-tailored, hugging her frame like it was designed for a magazine shoot. She posed beside Alaric, all smiles and perfection. I sipped the sparkling water in front of me. I didn't need champagne. I needed distance. Across the room, my parents hovered near the dessert table. I stood up and approached them, brushing off the invisible film of exclusion clinging to my shoulders. "Hi, Mom, Dad." My mother turned, giving me a quick once-over. "You look comfortable." I let it slide. Did the invite get lost in the mail, or did the printer just forget how to spell my name? She sighed. "It must have been a mix-up. These things happen. Don't make it a big deal." If it had been Isolde's name printed wrong, I'm guessing there would have been a reprint. My father chimed in quickly. "The flowers are beautiful, huh?" Deflection. Classic. I walked back to my table. Alone again, among strangers chatting about marketing clients and brand launches. I wasn't even sure they knew Isolde well. Maybe she needed filler guests. Maybe I was one of them. My eyes wandered back to the spotlight. Isolde was making her rounds, thanking people, posing, laughing. Then she turned and spotted me. She crossed the room, her heels silent, but her presence loud. "Oh, you made it," she said, air-kissing both my cheeks without letting her lips touch skin. Her eyes dropped to my dress. A simple dark blue number. Elegant, safe. "Loved that you wore that dress. It's brave," she said, flashing a smile too white to be real. I held my ground. "It's not about clothes, Isolde. Not tonight." She laughed, eyes gleaming. "You're right, it's about family. Try to blend in, okay?" She walked away before I could respond. the scent of her designer perfume lingering in the air like a challenge. Back at my corner table, the toasts began. Voices rang out, names were listed, stories shared. Laughter echoed from the front, applause erupted, none of it for me. My name wasn't mentioned. My seat was still near the pillar. I raised my glass to myself. No clinking, no cheers. Just the quiet sound of glass against my own lip. I was here, but not really. I set the empty glass down and stood slowly, smoothing my skirt with both hands, like that would somehow flatten the sharpness in my chest. The crowd buzzed with laughter that didn't quite reach my corner of the ballroom. I walked toward the gift table, not out of obligation, but because it was the one thing I had left to give. A box wrapped in deep blue, the kind of blue that reminded me of calm seas, of steadiness. Inside were 3 vintage brass bookmarks I found in a tucked-away bookstore near King Street, one shaped like a feather, another like a key, the last a lighthouse. I'd chosen them for meaning. She'd always accused me of being sentimental. The table was spotless. Gifts were stacked in elegant towers, color-coded bows cascading like floral arrangements. But mine was missing. I scanned each stack again, checked underneath for anything dropped or misplaced. Nothing. I caught the attention of a young woman in a black blazer holding a clipboard. "Excuse me, did a small navy blue box get dropped off here earlier today?" She tilted her head and checked something on her list. "If it didn't have a name tag, it may have been moved. Unlabeled packages are placed in the service room. Some don't make it to the table if they can't be verified." "Could I check?" I asked, already knowing the answer. She nodded and led me through a back corridor. The hallway smelled like lemon cleaner and sweat. Real sweat, not the kind that gets hidden with high-end deodorant. She opened a supply room door, and there it was. My box. The bow had slipped off. The lid was cracked. It looked like someone had opened it, decided it wasn't important, and abandoned it like a misaddressed letter. You don't have to be screamed at to be insulted. Sometimes silence is sharper. I didn't say, "Thank you." I didn't say anything. I just took the box, placed it gently into my purse, and walked back toward the main hall. Passing the powder room, I paused. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. It was one of those things that just happens when voices carry through old wood panels. "Did you see her dress? That lilac number? Looks like she picked it off the clearance rack at Marshall's." A second voice chimed in. "I thought she was one of the wait staff earlier." Laughter followed. Not mean-spirited laughter, but that sugary, breathy kind that cuts deeper because it pretends to be kind. I stood in the hallway, breathing steady. That dress had been handed to me by Isolde a week ago. She said it matched the color palette. "You want to look appropriate, right?" "Right." She dressed me for ridicule, and I let her. The door creaked as someone exited the powder room, and I stepped aside to avoid eye contact. It didn't matter. I didn't need to be seen in that moment. I needed to see. I walked back into the ballroom. My mother spotted me and waved me over. Not to greet me, not to introduce me to someone, to adjust the floral arrangement next to her. "You always had an eye for balance," she said, shifting a hydrangea out of alignment. "Keep it tight. Don't upstage the Dece. This is her moment." "Of course it is." I smiled. Just a flicker of the lips. No teeth, no warmth. Something inside me shifted, not snapped, just realigned, like a camera lens finding its focus. This wasn't a case of being forgotten. It was a pattern, a strategy disguised as celebration. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't storm out or cause a scene. I adjusted the hydrangea. I smoothed the tablecloth. And then I stepped away, walking slowly toward the bar. Alaric was standing near the bourbon selection, jacket slung over one shoulder, glass half full in his hand. He noticed me before I said anything. "Hey," he said gently, like we were still the friends we once were. "Nice to see you here." I nodded, unsure if my voice would come out flat or furious. I chose careful honesty. I almost wasn't. He looked at me a second longer than necessary. Not pity, not curiosity. Something else. Awareness. "Well, I'm glad you came. I didn't respond. I just held his gaze for a moment, then turned toward the sparkling water dispenser. It wasn't just a missing present. I was the part of her past she was trying to delete. The bartender gave me a slow nod when I asked for sparkling water, like he knew exactly the kind of night I was surviving. I sipped from the stemmed glass, letting the fizz dull my tongue while my eyes found Alaric again. Shoulders relaxed, laughter just barely masking how much effort it probably took him to get through each toast, each posed photo with my sister. For a split second, I saw the version of him that used to walk beside me in college. Same quiet amusement, same watchful pause before speaking. The version of him that once felt like mine, before she took him, wrapped him in sparkle, and called it fate. I didn't even get a warning. He and I had spent half a semester glued together. Study groups turned into long walks back to the dorms. Coffee dates blurred the line into real dates. We never called it anything. We didn't need to. That one night, late December, 2 days before break, I was sure something would finally be said. Instead, I got a text. Sorry, something came up. Rain check? That was the last message he sent me. When classes resumed in January, he showed up at a campus party, holding her hand. She had a way of entering rooms like she'd just won something. That night was no different, and maybe she had. He never looked at me again the same way. I never asked why, never confronted either of them. I just buried it, folded the memory like a note passed in middle school, creased at the corners, never thrown away. That was what I had been taught. In our house, the younger sibling kept the peace. The older one kept the spotlight. And peacekeepers don't raise their voices. They bite their tongues. The ballroom had started dimming its chandeliers to prepare for the first dance. I wandered past the reception area, where a projection screen played a looping photo montage. Childhood birthday parties, 4th of July trips, matching Halloween costumes. A rotating carousel of curated nostalgia. Except, I wasn't in a single frame. It wasn't just omission. It was precision. Even the group shots I remembered being part of. They were cropped. I stood there a little longer than I meant to, hoping maybe I had missed something. But the sequence played again, and still, nothing. Not even one picture of the two of us as kids, as if I'd never been part of her story at all. Behind me, a man's voice said softly, "I thought she was an only child." I turned slightly. He wasn't even talking to me, just murmuring to his date. I walked away without reacting, the screen still flickering behind me. The photos were never for us anyway. They were for the story she wanted the world to believe. She didn't delete me from one moment. She deleted the proof that I ever mattered. Outside the hallway leading to the coat room, I found a bench and sat down, letting the walls muffle the sound of the DJ's playlist switching to a soft jazz number. I didn't cry. That part of me had burned out years ago. I reviewed the pattern, not the one-night insults, not the passive comments. The pattern. The way she always found ways to erase me quietly, beneath a smile, behind a compliment, under the guise of aesthetics or logistics. And it worked, because I let it. But not tonight. This wasn't about a dress or a missing gift, or even Alaric. This was about making sure I never existed on her terms. And I finally understood. This wasn't history repeating. This was a deliberate performance. A strategy. I wasn't going to fight her on stage, but I wasn't going to stay in the wings either. I stood up, adjusted my dress, and walked slowly toward the main ballroom again. I wasn't ready to make noise, but I was ready to start listening closely. I eased back into the main ballroom, just as the servers began preparing the dessert station. My heels moved soundlessly on the thick carpet, but my mind buzzed with a clarity that made every clink of glass and flicker of light feel magnified. I didn't speak to anyone, I just watched. For the first time that night, I wasn't participating. I was observing. A young man from catering appeared beside me, holding a sleek, ivory-colored box with gold trim. His smile was bright, rehearsed. "Special delivery for the bride's favorite sister," he said cheerfully. I blinked at the word. Favorite. He handed me the box. A small card tucked underneath the ribbon read, "To Natalie, because sweetness deserves sweetness." My lips curved into something that resembled a thank you, but my hands paused. There was nothing wrong with the box, not on the surface, but something about it buzzed wrong under my skin. I waited until he disappeared, then walked with it toward one of the wall mirrors near the rear exit. The lighting there was dimmer, but angled. I peeled back the lid slowly, careful not to disturb the decorative frosting too much. It was a slice of vanilla rose cake, impeccably plated, smooth as porcelain. But near the base, just above the outer edge, I caught it. A shimmer, a glint. Something that looked like it could have been sugar crystal if I hadn't turned it under the light again. It wasn't sugar. I knew what I was seeing. A shard, slender, clear, almost invisible unless you were looking. I didn't panic. I didn't gasp. I closed the box again, retied the ribbon, and walked it over to the edge of the event staff station. "Hi," I said evenly to a woman managing a checklist. "Do you know if the couple's toast cake is ready?" She nodded, pointing to a covered tray on the side cart. "Yes, identical slices, same recipe. They'll be plated at the top of the hour." Identical. That slice wasn't a mistake. That slice was a message. I tucked the box into my purse, not to eat, not to discard, just to keep. I didn't know what I would do with it yet, but instinct said not to let it out of my hands. Back inside the ballroom, I noticed the side lighting above the floral arch had been set too bright, washing out every photo beneath it. I flagged one of the event staffers, trying to be helpful, trying to pretend like I still had a role here. "Hey," I said gently, "you might want to lower the output on that left spotlight. It's creating a glare on every lens pointed that way." The man looked at his clipboard, then at me. "Sorry, only Isolde has authority to approve changes," he said flatly. "We've been told not to make any adjustments unless she says so." I nodded like I understood, then stepped back. Years ago, I helped Isolde build her first brand shoot from scratch. I held reflectors, arranged bouquets, even spent 3 hours taping down cables so her dress wouldn't catch in the footage. Back then, she had no audience, just ambition. And me. Now I couldn't even be trusted with a light switch. It's strange when you're no longer overlooked. You're actively excluded. That's a different kind of silence. One that isn't accidental. One that's authored. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I just walked. Past the buffet, past the string quartet, past a group of guests laughing at something I would never be invited to hear. And I watched her. Isolde, my sister, my rival, my eraser. She stood near the head table, smiling with perfect ease, one hand resting lightly on Alaric's forearm, the other gesturing to a group of donors I recognized from her firm's last gala. She laughed at just the right decibel, nodded at just the right rhythm. A maid of honor whispered in her ear, and without missing a beat, she pointed to a misplaced orchid 2 feet away. The maid adjusted it instantly. Every movement was planned. Every smile calculated. She wasn't celebrating, she was producing, and I realized, maybe she always had been. You start to wonder how many performances you've clapped for without realizing they were staged, and how many stages you were never meant to stand on. There was something inside that cake, and this time I wouldn't swallow it just to keep the peace. I stepped away from the center of the room and made my way to the long hallway where the wall-to-ceiling mirrors were mounted. It was the quietest place in the venue. No music, no laughter, just the soft hum of the central air. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the box. Carefully, I untied the ribbon, opened the lid halfway, and tilted the slice of cake under the light. One turn, then another. That's when I saw it. Not just a shimmer, 3 of them. Thin slivers embedded along the base of the frosting, as transparent as glass, but unmistakable once you knew what to look for. I didn't react. I just stared. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't a mistake. She wanted it to be poetic. A slice for the sweet sister, with just enough pain to be forgettable by morning. I closed the box and placed it back into my purse, wrapping it tight in a napkin before zipping the clutch. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. This wasn't shock, this was confirmation. On the way back toward the lounge, I passed a small group of guests arriving late. One of them, a woman in a sequined jumpsuit, glanced at me and waved her hand casually. "Hey, do you mind grabbing a bottle of champagne for table 7? She asked. I blinked, caught off guard. "I'm not staff," she laughed. "Oh, sorry, I just thought, never mind. You just look like you work back of house." She turned back to her group, unbothered. Of course I did. My seat was near the kitchen entrance. My dress, selected by Isolde herself, was subdued, the kind of outfit you could fade into a wall in. I'd been placed there by design. When someone works that hard to make you small, it's because they're scared of how big you could get. I moved through the crowd slowly, retracing my steps, observing more than engaging. Every glance, every shift of body language told me exactly where I stood in the pecking order. I wasn't the forgotten sister. I was the one being erased, intentionally. I found the event coordinator near the reception table, clipboard in hand. "Excuse me," I said, tone friendly. "Do you know where the couple's toast cake is being held?" She hesitated. "Why?" "I just want to make sure it's refrigerated. This heat's brutal." She glanced at her notes, then motioned toward the back hallway. "It's pre-plated, covered in the kitchen prep area. Left side, second shelf." "Thanks," I said. I didn't head there immediately. I just needed the information, needed to know how far this had been orchestrated. I started to piece together the timeline, the rotations of the staff, when the cake would be served, who would deliver it. I didn't have a full plan yet, but I had a location. I had motive. I had proof in my purse. It wasn't time to act, but it was time to prepare. As I passed near the stage, I saw Isolde again, standing near the archway of roses, laughing into the flash of a camera, hand resting gently on Alaric's shoulder. She caught my eye, and for the first time, she walked toward me. She stopped 2 feet away, her smile still fixed but slightly thinner. "Everything okay?" she asked. I mirrored her smile. "Perfect, just enjoying the details." Her eyes narrowed just slightly. "That's what they're for." "Of course," I said. "You've thought of everything." She nodded, stepping back into the spotlight. She still thought I was the sister who stayed quiet, who clapped politely, who didn't ask questions. She didn't know I'd stopped swallowing glass a long time ago. As Isolde turned away, slipping back into her curated spotlight, I stayed where I was. Not frozen, focused. Her performance was seamless. Mine would be quiet. I wandered past the edge of the reception area, down the hallway where the technical team had set up a temporary station to manage the slideshow and camera feeds. I wasn't planning to linger, but then I saw it. A monitor, still powered on, looping through raw footage from earlier that day. No one was watching it. The operator had clearly stepped away for a break. I leaned closer, scanning the scenes, guests arriving, flower setups, staff moving trays. And then I saw it. There, on screen, was a wide-angle shot from earlier that afternoon. Isolde, standing beside a catering staffer, handing him the same ivory cake box now resting in my purse. I couldn't hear the audio, but her lips moved closely to his ear before he walked off. The next frame, him handing it to me. A camera doesn't capture motive, but it doesn't have to. It captures truth. And this one had done its job. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera quietly, and took a screenshot of the monitor. Then another. Just enough to freeze the evidence. Just enough to prove this wasn't paranoia. It was premeditation. I emailed the files to myself with a single subject line. In case I need it. I stepped back, heart steady. It wasn't revenge I was after. It was clarity. As I exited the side hallway, I passed by the lounge area designated for bridal prep. It was nearly empty now, just a few scattered bags, half-empty champagne flutes, and the lingering scent of hairspray. I recognized Isolde's custom clutch immediately, sitting on the arm of a velvet chair. The screen was still lit, unlocked. I hesitated, but curiosity doesn't wait for permission. I didn't open apps or scroll. I didn't need to. The screen already displayed a note, a list, titled in all caps, Control, Natalie's Triggers. Beneath it, Play Sweet. Give her old dress. Offer cake mid-program. Keep family distant. Defer praise. My throat dried, but I didn't look away. At the bottom of the list was an audio file labeled, If She Talks. I didn't open it. I didn't press play. Instead, I airdropped the file to my phone silently and backed away without leaving a trace. She had built a playbook, but forgot I might read it. I walked back toward the media station, locking my phone and tucking it deep into my purse. Every piece of what I had gathered, screenshots, audio, her handwritten sabotage, was now filed in a folder labeled The Archive. I didn't know if I would ever show it to anyone, but I knew what it meant. She'd prepared for everything, except being recorded by her own tactics. Near the tech table, a guy in his 20s, wearing a simple black polo and adjusting a light tripod, caught my eye. I recognized him from earlier, probably the second shooter, assisting the main event photographer. "You're the only one not trying to be seen tonight," he said with a slight smile. "Isn't that ironic?" I replied. He nodded toward the screen I'd just left. "Don't worry, the cameras saw what mattered." I gave him a long look, measuring him not as an ally, but as a witness, maybe even a safeguard. I wasn't sure yet, but his words sat right. Back at my table, I didn't sit. I didn't toast. I didn't speak. Instead, I stood behind the room's performances, holding more truth than anyone realized. Her speeches were scripted. Her smiles were rehearsed. But the damage? That was always live. It was late enough that the first rounds of wine had begun loosening everyone's edges, but early enough that the real unraveling hadn't started yet. The playlist shifted from classical strings to something with a beat, and I used the noise to move through the crowd without being stopped. At the back corner, beside the stage entrance, I spotted the printout taped to the wall. The final program run of show. My name was listed under Family Remarks for the evening slot, but someone had drawn a thick red line through it, in pen. Not strike through, not edited, canceled. Below it, handwritten in block letters. Sloane. Sloane, Isolde's ever-present PR shadow. The one who laughed a second too hard at her jokes and handed her fresh lip gloss without being asked. Of course. I approached the event coordinator, someone I vaguely remembered from a previous corporate event. Her name tag read Mara. "Hi, Mara," I said quietly, like we were two co-workers catching up. She blinked in surprise. "Oh, hi, Natalie. Beautiful event, right?" I smiled faintly. "I just noticed my slot for the family toast is missing." Her eyes flickered to the wall. "Yes. We were told by the bride this morning that there'd be a change. She mentioned something about keeping things concise for time. Emotional concerns, I think she said." "Right," I said, nodding slowly. "Thanks for letting me know." I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I just turned and walked back into the crowd, head high, spine straight. But I didn't sit. Minutes later, the microphone crackled, and Sloane walked up to the stage holding a silver note card in one hand, a glass of bubbly in the other. She smiled sweetly. "I'm honored to share a few words about the beautiful couple." The words that followed weren't hers. I knew them, line for line. The joke about Isolde getting kicked out of ballet because she was too directive. The story about Alaric accidentally shrinking her sweater in college. The line about how some people shine in rooms. They make the rest of us warmer by standing near them. I wrote that last one during a late-night edit 3 weeks ago. She even used the same rhythm I practiced out loud. And the room clapped. My parents beamed. Alaric chuckled like it was the first time he'd heard the story. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I recorded it. Back at my table, I pulled up my Google Drive. The folder I'd created, as sold wedding drafts, showed a new access log from 2 days ago. Opened, downloaded, shared. Sloane's email was listed as the user who had downloaded it. The file she delivered wasn't even renamed. Just cleaned up, line-spaced, reformatted, and printed. They didn't just take my seat. They printed my name in invisible ink and handed it to someone louder. After the speech, Isolde made her way toward me, carrying 2 glasses of champagne. She held one out, like a peace offering. "Wasn't Sloane great?" she asked, eyes dancing. "She really captured you," I said, voice even. Isolde's grin widened. "We're all a reflection of who we serve, aren't we?" I stared at her for a beat. Some reflections lie, others record. Her expression tightened just enough to catch. "You're not upset, are you?" "Wouldn't dream of ruining your moment," I said softly, taking the glass and setting it down, untouched. She walked away with her mask still intact, but I saw it slip for just a second as she turned. Inside, I didn't feel broken. I felt timed. They wanted a performance. I was about to give them a scene they'd never forget. The announcement for dessert echoed across the ballroom, just as I slipped back toward the edge of the crowd. Servers rolled in trays of plated cake slices, and a soft hush settled over the room. It was the ceremonial moment, the sweet punctuation of the evening before the dancing resumed. Isolde and Alaric made their way to the center, all smiles, hands linked like every magazine cover she'd ever studied. The cameras turned. She picked up the gold-plated knife, and together they made the first cut. The guests applauded, phones up, champagne glasses lifted in tandem. A few moments later, they were handed their slices, white rose cake, delicate sugar frosting, almost too perfect to eat. Alaric lifted his fork with a grin, bit down, then froze. I saw it before anyone else did. The slight wince, the twitch in his cheek. He dropped the fork. There was a moment, just 1 second, where everything went still. Then came the cough. He doubled forward slightly, hand to his mouth. A speck of red appeared between his fingers. Then more. Gasps rippled across the ballroom, chairs scraped, music cut off mid-beat. A server shouted for medical assistance. I didn't move. I didn't rush forward or melt into the chaos. I stood where I was, hand resting lightly on my clutch. I didn't need to say anything. The cake spoke for itself. People circled him, unsure what to do. Some guests backed away, visibly shaken. A woman whispered, "Was that glass?" Another replied, "Is someone trying to hurt him?" EMTs who had been on standby rushed in. Isolde stood frozen, face pale, but only for a second. Then, as if flipping a switch, she stepped into the role of panicked fiancé. "Oh my God, Alaric, what happened? Are you okay?" Too much, too polished. I took 2 slow steps closer, just to hear, just to make sure I wasn't missing anything. Isolde cried out again, louder this time, drawing attention, but her eyes kept scanning the room, searching for me. I didn't flinch. I didn't gloat. I simply watched the image crumble in real time. Within minutes, Alaric was escorted to a private suite, EMTs flanking both sides. I knew where he'd be. I waited, then followed. The bridal suite was less polished than the ballroom, scattered makeup kits, spare shoes, 2 purses tossed open on the vanity. Isolde was there, hovering near the couch, wringing her hands until she saw me walk in. Her mask cracked. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. I held out the box. The cake, untouched, still sealed with the card. "To return something that was never meant for me." She lunged forward to snatch it, then stopped herself, remembering there were people watching. "You have no idea what you've done," she spat. "No," I replied. "You're right. I thought I was your sister. But clearly, I was just the insurance policy. And tonight, I lapsed." She stepped closer, voice shaking now. "You think this will make people like you?" "No, but they'll see you." And then, she broke. "She deserved it!" she shouted, her voice shrill, echoing off the walls. She's always gotten everything without even trying. Silence. Absolute silence. EMTs. A bridal assistant. Alaric, sitting upright on the sofa, gauze at the corner of his lip. Every one of them had heard it. Her hands flew to her mouth, but it was too late. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I turned and walked out, leaving the box behind, exactly where it belonged. Whispers began the moment I stepped into the hallway. From staff, from guests, from people who'd pretended I was wallpaper just an hour earlier. The tide had shifted. Some looked at me with shock, others with quiet nods of respect. I didn't explain. I didn't defend. I just walked. She spent her whole life crafting an image. I spent mine staying quiet. But tonight, silence had a cost. And it was hers to pay. By the time I re-entered the ballroom, the music had stopped. No one was dancing. No one was talking. The lights hadn't dimmed, but the air felt heavier, as if everyone knew something had shifted, but wasn't sure how to name it. Alaric stood near the center of the room, upright but pale, a bandage pressed gently against the corner of his lip. His jacket had been removed. His shirt was still tucked, but slightly wrinkled now, like the chaos had pressed into the fabric. He walked slowly to the microphone. No one announced him. No one needed to. The MC stepped aside with a nod and a nervous half-smile. Alaric took the mic with a calm I hadn't seen on him all night. Not the calm of a groom, the calm of someone ready to leave. "This isn't how I imagined today ending," he began, voice clear but subdued. "But maybe this is how truth begins." The room held its breath. He looked directly at Isolde. "You knew I hated performance, but this whole thing, it wasn't a celebration. It was a production, a show, a controlled narrative." Then, slowly, with care, he reached into his pocket, pulled out the ring, and walked it over to the gift table. He set it down. No speech, no drama, just finality. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few women clutched their chests. One of Isolde's colleagues quietly backed toward the exit. "You knew who I was," he continued, "and still chose to sell the opposite version. I won't be part of this anymore." He didn't wait for applause. He didn't need it. I stood off to the side, watching it all unfold. Not smug, not surprised, just settled. People didn't know where to look. Some stared at the floor, others peeked at me, then quickly looked away. But a few held their gaze, quiet acknowledgement in their eyes. "She really tried to kill him," I heard someone mutter. "Is she going to jail?" whispered a vendor behind me. No one answered, but the tension answered for them. I slipped through a side door and stepped out into the cool night. The air bit at my arms, but it felt cleaner than inside. Realer. A moment later, I heard the door open behind me. Footsteps, my father's. He walked up beside me, hands deep in his pockets, eyes fixed ahead. "You could have told us sooner," he said. "Would you have believed me?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer. "She was your pride," I added. There was a long pause. "And you were the one I didn't understand." I nodded. "Now you do." He placed his hand on my shoulder. Not out of affection, but as a kind of resignation. No hug, no apology. Just a gesture, late but not meaningless. We stood in silence for another minute before I turned back inside to collect my things. The ballroom hadn't recovered. People stood in clusters, whispering in tight circles. Isolde was in the far corner, surrounded by her inner circle, most of whom were now avoiding eye contact. Her eyes found mine as I walked by. She didn't speak, neither did I. There was no fire left to burn. She wasn't my villain anymore, just a sad woman clinging to a crown no longer real. I walked past her, picked up my purse, and headed toward the exit. My heels clicked against the marble like punctuation. They asked me to forgive. But first, I wanted them to remember. By morning, my phone was vibrating off the nightstand. Missed calls, texts, screenshots. One headline in particular sat bold across a news site. Fairy tale engagement ends in scandal. I didn't feel surprised, just tired. I scrolled in silence, the screen lighting my apartment's dim gray walls as if it, too, was trying to process the truth. One video had already gone viral. Shot from the side of the reception hall, grainy but clear enough, it showed Isolde handing the ivory cake box to a waiter. Her lips moved close to his ear. "Make sure she gets this privately." The video paused, zoomed, and now the world could see what I had known. Nothing Isolde did was random. I didn't post the clip. I didn't even know who had. But I sent one text to the assistant I'd spoken to near the tech booth. "Thank you for recording what I couldn't prove with words. No emojis, no signature, just truth. People say healing starts when you're heard, but the real shift comes when you're finally believed." Later that week, I met Alaric's legal team at a quiet office downtown. The meeting wasn't long, just formal. Turns out, an old LLC we'd formed in college, back when the two of us had daydreamed about starting a creative studio, had never been dissolved. On paper, I was still listed as a silent partner. Isolde had tried to overwrite my name with her own in more recent filings, but original records didn't lie. When I handed them a printed copy from the state's registration site, Alaric looked at me across the table and said, "She tried to scrub you out of everything, but business doesn't lie like people do." I could have pressed for rights. I could have claimed my share, taken control of assets, made her pay in dollars instead of dignity. But I didn't. I used the documents to formally sever the last financial thread connecting us. No ownership, no lawsuits, just closure. The next morning, sponsors began pulling out from Isolde's PR firm. A memo leaked, her board distancing themselves, pending internal review. A former assistant posted anonymously on a forum, confirming years of emotional manipulation, threats, silence pacts. People began messaging me, some I hadn't heard from in years. "I always wondered how you stayed so quiet. We see you now. I'm sorry it took this long." I didn't reply. Not because I was bitter, but because there was nothing to add. Her empire had been built on silence, and most of that silence was mine. That night, I opened the folder on my phone labeled The Archive, watched the videos again, read the notes I had taken, reviewed the timestamps, the metadata. All of it added up to a kind of truth that didn't need amplification anymore. It just needed to exist. I posted one image on my private account, a scan of my speech, the one I never got to give. No caption, no comments turned on, just a story that never made it to the microphone. But now it had an audience. They asked if I'd meet with her, to talk, to maybe forgive. I said I'd think about it, but I already knew. The request came by phone, not text. That alone told me how serious it was. "Your father's worried," my mother said, her voice stretched thin like aging thread. "Can we meet? Just us, no drama." I agreed, not because I owed her anything, but because sometimes silence gives permission for people to rewrite the story. I wanted no such permission. We met at a quiet cafe off King Street. She was already seated, hands clasped together, a cup of chamomile untouched in front of her. She looked tired, not from sleeplessness, but from years of denial finally turning heavy. "I'm not going to beg," she started, eyes not quite meeting mine. I waited. "But Isolde isn't sleeping. Your father, he's barely speaking. Natalie, you've made your point, haven't you?" I stirred my coffee slowly. "You're asking me to bury it. I'm asking you to keep what's left of this family from falling apart." I leaned back in my chair. "It already did. You just weren't watching." She didn't argue. She looked at her tea, then said quietly, "She doesn't know how to come back from this." "She never planned to come back from anything," I replied, "only to climb higher." She flinched at that. I left without finishing my drink. 2 days later, a courier envelope arrived at my apartment. No return address, no note except a handwritten line in the corner. "Please open." Inside was a velvet jewelry box. I recognized it before I even lifted the lid. The necklace I had given Isolde for her 23rd birthday, back when I still believed a gesture could bridge the gap. A small gold locket, etched with a date only the two of us remembered. Folded inside the box was a note, torn from one of her branded notepads. It was always yours. I just didn't know how to say thank you. I closed the box and didn't open it again. Some gifts, when returned, don't heal. They confirm who they were never meant for. A week passed. Then another. Until finally, I received a formal invite. One last attempt, my father said, to bring us together before it's too late. The dinner was at their house. The same house where Isolde used to dominate every holiday, every graduation speech, every room. I arrived last, deliberately. She was there. No makeup, no designer gown, just a neutral sweater, her hair pulled back like she was trying to look human. My father cleared his throat as we sat. I know this won't fix anything, but I wanted us to try. Isolde looked down at her plate. I wasn't well, she said softly. I was afraid of being replaced. I cut into my salad with slow precision. You didn't hurt me because you were afraid. You hurt me because you could. Her lip trembled. I didn't wait for the tears. I didn't come here to fix this, I said, laying my napkin on the table. I came to close it. I stood. My father reached for my arm but didn't pull. He knew better. Outside, under the porch light, he followed. She'll always be your sister, he said quietly. She'll always be your daughter, I replied. He exhaled. So will you. But his voice wavered, as if even he didn't quite believe it. And I realized I didn't need him to. I didn't need them to choose. I just needed them to stop expecting me to lose. She thought silence was safety. I thought truth was peace. Only one of us was right. I never opened the invitation. I didn't need to. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days. Cream cardstock embossed with a therapist's name I vaguely recognized. Inside, I assumed, was a request. A final scene from a sister who wanted a new ending. One hosted in a circle, with tissues in the center and pre-printed talking prompts. I didn't attend. I didn't need her to hear me anymore. I needed to hear myself. So I wrote a letter, not to her, not to anyone, really, just for me. It started simply, "You're done waiting." Then I burned it, lit the corner with a match, and let the words curl into ash over the kitchen sink. There was something deeply final about it, watching language dissolve into smoke. Words that had never reached her didn't need to linger with me. The next morning, I unpacked the last of my boxes. A small studio apartment in a Charleston neighborhood no one in my family ever bothered to visit. The walls were white, clean. The floors creaked slightly when I walked barefoot to the window. My easel was set up near the light. A canvas waited, blank and patient. I hadn't painted in months, years really, not since I stopped believing I was allowed to create something that was mine, and only mine. That morning, I picked up the brush. Later that afternoon, I got a text from Alaric. Proud of you, and grateful you acted when I didn't. I didn't respond. Some connections don't need reopening. Some stories don't need sequels. Still, I smiled. I spent the rest of the week quietly. No media, no interviews, no phone calls from people who once called me dramatic behind closed doors and brave in public comments. I posted one thing, just one. A photo of my original speech, creased from where it had been folded too long, ink faded but still legible. Captioned simply, I didn't get to read this, but I lived it. The comments poured in, strangers who recognized their own silence in mine. Mothers, daughters, coworkers, all saying some version of the same thing. Thank you for choosing honesty over harmony. Sometimes closure doesn't come from being heard. It comes from refusing to whisper anymore. A week later, I passed the Belvedere Grand on my walk home from the art supply store. It looked the same. Gleaming, ornate. The chandelier still visible from the sidewalk. I stopped and looked up at it. I remembered standing under it just weeks ago, in a dress picked for mockery, with my name absent from every printed list. And now? Now I didn't need to be listed. I had written my own place. I was never invisible. I was just too quiet for the wrong room. So I walked past the building, head high, purse light, soul lighter. She wrote her ending in glitter and lies. I wrote mine in truth and didn't need applause. Hi, I'm Delphine. My parents used to call me the help at family events. They'd say things like, "You don't eat with us, you assist." So I did what any obedient daughter would do. I stayed quiet, cleared plates, smiled through it. But after being told, again, that I wasn't really family, I made a decision. I bought the entire resort they vacation at every summer. And now, they eat on land they don't even know belongs to me. But what hurts more than their words is what came next. The lawsuit, the fake Facebook posts, the whispered lies at church brunch. You ever wonder what it feels like to be erased by the people who raised you, while still being expected to pay the bill? Let me show you. The next morning, no one noticed I was gone until the cake had already been served. I had been gone for hours by then, long enough to pack my small suitcase, check out under another name, and drive down the winding roads back to my own place without hitting traffic. Funny thing, traffic. People think it's the obstacle, but silence, the kind where you expect someone to call your name and they don't, that's heavier than any rush hour. When I pulled up to the family resort the day before, I already knew how the day would go. My mother had sent the invitation on group text, not directly, not personally. Just a link to the event page with a "would be nice if you came." Not "please come," not "we'd love to see you," just "would be nice." That's how it always started. The lobby was dressed like a wedding catalog. White roses, dripping candle chandeliers, linen napkins folded like origami swans. Every inch of it screamed curated warmth, but none of it felt like home. I caught a glimpse of my brother, Branson, near the check-in. Of course he got the hug. The proud smile. The handshake from Uncle Roy, the one who never remembered my name unless I wore a name tag. Branson spotted me and gave a nod, like he was greeting a distant coworker. Not a sister. Certainly not the girl who once covered for him in high school when he snuck out past curfew. But maybe I should have expected that. Branson had always played it safe. He became exactly who my parents hoped one of us would be. Doctor, married. Divorced now, but that's another story. White picket fence in the suburbs, 401k. Dentist clean smile. The golden one. I stepped up to the reception table and gave my name. The woman behind the clipboard flipped a few pages. Then she smiled, confused. "Oh, you're not on the guest seating list, but your mom said you'd help with appetizers. I think you're on the catering team's list instead." She said it kindly, like it made sense. I didn't argue. I just nodded, reached for the tray of deviled eggs they offered, and walked toward the patio. That's when I realized. No one had even asked why I didn't bring someone. No, "where's your +1?" No, "glad you could make it." I was a fixture, something to fill a gap. Not a guest, not a daughter. As I wove through the crowd, balancing a tray, I passed Aunt Sylvia gossiping loudly by the mimosa bar. "Delphine?" she said, squinting like she was trying to remember if I was someone's assistant. "Isn't she doing something with computers? Online?" My mother chimed in, laughing. "She helps with some projects. You know, little things. She likes to keep herself busy." Busy. That word. Not successful, not driven, just busy. Like a bored housewife tinkering with paint-by-number crafts. Someone reached for an egg from my tray, didn't even look me in the eye, and asked, "Could you grab more lemon water, please?" He thought I worked there, and no one corrected him. At that moment, I wanted to say something, anything. But what would I even say? "Actually, I own this resort now?" Not yet. Not like that. There's a time and a way to deliver the truth, and this wasn't it. Dinner came. I watched them set the table, round, elegant, marked with name cards. Everyone was called over, seated with smiles and camera phones snapping away. I stood near the edge, waiting. Branson was already toasting with Dad. My seat never appeared. I approached cautiously. Maybe it was a mistake. My father didn't even look up. "Dell, you can eat after. They're short-staffed. Help get the older folks settled first, will you?" He waved his hand toward the back, like I was one of the servers. My fingers wrapped around the edge of a napkin, a little too tightly. I stood there for 1 beat, then 2, waiting, hoping someone would say something, but no one did. Branson didn't even meet my eyes. So I turned, walked toward the service door that led to the kitchen. I paused halfway, between 2 worlds, one I never truly belonged to, and one I had spent years building from scratch. "I'm not your staff," I whispered. No one heard. A young girl with a catering badge passed me with a smile and a quick, "Excuse me." I stepped aside for her. At least she acknowledged me. Outside, the air was cooler than expected. I leaned against the wooden railing overlooking the vines that stretched beyond the property line, steady and unconcerned. My phone buzzed. 1 word, finalized. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just let the breeze touch my cheek like a quiet reminder. Then, I turned toward the lodge, still filled with clinking glasses and stories I wasn't invited into, and murmured under my breath, "Then I guess it's mine now." 2 hours later, I was gone, and nobody noticed until the cake had already been served. I had left before the eggs were cold, before the patio started buzzing with champagne toasts and mimosa-fueled nostalgia. I didn't bother saying goodbye. That would have implied I'd been welcomed in the first place. The morning air was softer than I expected. Fog clung to the edges of the vineyard, like it didn't want to let the day begin. My heels clicked against the flagstone as I stepped back into the dining hall, trying to shrink into the background without actually disappearing. I didn't want to make a scene. I just wanted to be present long enough for no one to accuse me of not showing up. By the time I arrived, most people were already halfway through breakfast. Branson was holding court near the fireplace, surrounded by cousins and uncles, who still called him Doc, even though they knew about the malpractice board review. Reputation always ran slower in this family, especially when denial was a better suit to wear than accountability. I hovered near the buffet, pouring myself a small cup of coffee. My mother spotted me and waved, not to join the table, but to point toward the mimosa pitcher. She mouthed, "Could you refill that?" Like I'd volunteered for brunch duty. I gave her a small smile, not because I wanted to, but because it felt easier than refusing. That's when I noticed the photographer. Black slacks, black vest, professional gear around his neck. The same man who had taken pictures the night before. He was adjusting the lighting near the east-facing windows and calling out to the family. "Let's get one with all immediate family. Quick shot before dessert?" People began rising from their seats. My mother clapped lightly. "Branson, get up here. Stand next to your dad. Sylvia, make sure the little ones don't block the front." I moved, instinctively, toward the forming cluster. Then paused. The photographer looked around and asked, "Is this everyone?" And my father, without even glancing in my direction, said, "Let's keep it tight. No need to overcomplicate the frame." My feet stopped. No one turned. Branson adjusted his tie and slipped into place between Merrick and my mother like he was born to belong. I stepped back. Quietly, deliberately. The kind of retreat you make when you've learned that staying costs more than leaving. The camera shutter clicked. I didn't hear my name once. As the photo wrapped, I heard a cousin near the juice bar murmur, "Awkward," followed by a short laugh. I didn't turn around. I refilled the mimosa pitcher. No one said thank you. I didn't expect them to. When breakfast wound down, a second table was being cleared at the far end of the room. Smaller, no place cards. One server began placing utensils in a quick, impersonal rhythm. I assumed it was for late arrivals or overflow, so I picked up my plate and made my way to the main table. Just as I had done dozens of times before in my life. Somewhere between hopeful and naive. My mother caught my movement and leaned in, smiling too tightly. "Oh no, honey," she whispered. This table's for family. Yours is over there, with the kitchen crew. You understand? I froze. Not out of surprise, but out of exhaustion. I had no more rebuttals left. No more energy to explain why that smile cut deeper than a slap. I simply turned and walked toward the other table. And that's when I decided. This would be the last time they saw me fill silence with service. Once I finished eating, I excused myself and stepped outside. The sun had finally risen past the fog line, casting soft gold over the rows of grapevines. I took out my phone, tapped on a calendar reminder, and dialed a number I had memorized but never used aloud. "Yes," I said when the assistant answered. "I'll confirm the board review document by Tuesday. Also, let's schedule the ribbon cutting for next month. Coordinate with local press." There was a pause on the other end. Then, "Congratulations, Ms. Hoyt. Full ownership, it's official." I hung up. Across the vineyard, the resort stood tall and oblivious, its main deck hosting the final brunch clinks of a family that never knew I was in the room, much less in control of the building. A hummingbird zipped past my ear, its wings a blur of intention. I let it pass. No one inside noticed I was missing. Again. But this time, it felt different. This time, they were standing on my floor. By the time my letter arrived on their doorstep, I was already 50 miles away, and freer than I'd felt in years. I hadn't told anyone I was leaving the resort early. I didn't owe that to people who hadn't noticed when I was standing right next to them. While they sliced into lemon cake and toasted to family traditions, I was already halfway to my house, windows rolled down, letting the wind do the talking. I needed the quiet. I needed space from rooms where I only ever existed in service, not in memory. But silence has a half-life. It lingers longer than it should. And by late morning, I found myself driving back. Not home, not quite, but back toward the lounge area, where the extended family had gathered for one last round of coffee before checkout. I wasn't there for them. I just needed to walk in, see it clearly, feel it fully, and know that when I left this time, I meant it. The lounge smelled of burnt espresso and too much cologne. They always wore too much cologne, like scent could distract from character. I slipped in through the side entrance, past the antique piano my uncle always bragged about owning a replica of. Nobody looked up. A few chairs scraped against tile, laughter echoed across the room. My mother was perched in the corner, sipping her drink with a posture that said she was tired, but only of pretending to care. "Branson," someone said from across the room, "we heard about the board suspension. How's that going?" There was a long pause. Then one of my cousins, Janine, I think, cleared her throat and added, "It's probably just temporary, right? Everyone knows these things blow over." My Aunt Sylvia leaned forward. "He's under pressure, that's all. Still, a doctor is a doctor." I waited to hear my name. I waited to hear anything about what I'd done, or hadn't done. Nothing. I sat near the window, letting my silence take up more space than usual. There's a particular ache that comes from watching people rewrite the story while you're still in the room, like you're the ghost of your own timeline. Then came the real gut punch. Uncle Ross, polishing off his second whiskey before noon, said it loud enough to be heard by anyone not actively trying to ignore me. "Delphine should be grateful she doesn't have kids. Imagine the mess she'd make of that." I didn't flinch. Aunt Margie chuckled, swirling her drink like it made her wiser. "She always was a little off, not built for real life." My mother just nodded. Not a word in my defense. Not a breath of discomfort. Just that same expression she wore at church. Detached approval. My stomach turned, but I stayed still. That's a skill you learn in families like mine. How to stay still when everything inside you wants to stand and scream. Someone from across the table, probably one of Branson's golf buddies, smirked and said, "Hey Branson, your sister's still doing websites or something?" He laughed, shrugged. "I think she moved into property now. She's always got some little project going. You know her." I looked up just once and said calmly, "Actually, I closed on a 7-figure deal last month." That should have landed like a thunderclap. Instead, My father glanced at me, nodded without real attention, and said, "That's nice, dear. Anyway, Branson." And just like that, the spotlight went back to him, as if I hadn't spoken, as if my success was a polite interruption in the main event of his mediocrity. I stood slowly, placed my half-full cup on the side table, and started to walk away. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going or if I was okay. Then a voice, soft, small, honest, came from behind. "Why don't you live near Grandma and Grandpa?" It was my niece. Her hair still damp from a morning swim, her eyes too young to lie. I knelt beside her, looked her straight in the eye, and said gently, "Because even grown-ups know when they're not welcome." She tilted her head like she didn't fully understand, but she would. One day. I walked out without another word. The sunshine hit different this time. It wasn't warm, it was clarifying. As I crossed the parking lot, my phone buzzed again. A message from my attorney. "Full transfer confirmed. You own 100%. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just stopped walking and stared out at the edge of the vineyard beyond the lot, past the rows of grapevines and the neat white fencing. You don't need to burn bridges. Some collapse on their own when you stop carrying the weight. I stayed one final night, not out of obligation, but because I needed to end things clean. I didn't want anyone to say I stormed out, or that I made a scene. Quiet exits are harder to rewrite in family lore. The resort had finally emptied out by evening. No more heels clacking down the hallway. No more wine-stained laughter drifting from the main hall. Just the slow hum of cleaning machines and the gentle hush of linens being folded by hands that worked with more grace than anyone gave them credit for. I closed the door to my suite behind me and exhaled. The kind of exhale that only comes when you're not trying to hold your shape for other people anymore. I folded each piece of clothing carefully, out of habit, not sentiment. I wasn't packing to retreat, I was packing to conclude, to step out of a role I never auditioned for, but was cast in anyway. There was a notepad on the desk. Resort stationery, gold-trimmed. I sat down, picked up the pen, and wrote what needed to be said. If I was never family in your heart, don't expect me to act like one on paper. I paused. No rage, no sobbing, just clarity. You raised me out of duty, I'm leaving out of choice. I left the note on the desk. No envelope, no signature. Anyone who read it would know who it came from. Then, I opened the folder my lawyer had sent over 2 days earlier. Inside was a final copy of the acquisition transfer, notarized and official. At the top, the Cecilia Resort, full acquisition authorization. Below it, my name, Delphine Hoyt, etched in confident font that no one in that family had ever said out loud with pride. Beside the papers was a photograph I always kept tucked into the sleeve of my planner. My grandmother, Cecilia, sitting on a rattan bench with me, age 7, cross-legged and barefoot beside her. She was the only one who ever told me, "You don't have to be good at everything to be loved." She passed when I was in college. Nobody from the family came to the funeral. They said it was too far, too last minute, or she wasn't really immediate family. But she was mine, always was. I had renamed the resort after her months ago, in the contracts, on the paperwork, in every internal system. No one knew, not yet. I walked the resort grounds slowly that night, past the pool, where the floating candles had already been removed, past the lawn, where yesterday they posed for a photo I was never invited into. The garden lights glowed softly, throwing shadows against the hedges. A young man from the cleaning crew nodded as I passed. "Evening, ma'am." I nodded back. He didn't know my full name, but he knew I signed the checks. That was enough. In the distance, the staff was still tidying up after my family, picking up cocktail napkins they couldn't be bothered to throw away, straightening chairs that had been left crooked. Watching them reminded me of something I read once. Power isn't in how loudly you speak, but in how many people stop when you whisper. And I hadn't even begun to whisper yet. Later that night, I sat on the deck with a cup of tea and watched the lights go out, one wing at a time. My phone sat next to me, screen dark. No one had texted. No one asked if I was coming to breakfast in the morning, or if I made it home. I wasn't surprised. I had trained myself not to expect much from people who always delivered less. Still, the silence wasn't heavy. It was final. Just before sunrise, I walked to the front gate. Maintenance was mounting the new signage as scheduled. Black iron lettering, clean, timeless. The Cecilia, a sanctuary of renewal. Below that, in smaller script, in honor of those who saw us before we saw ourselves. I didn't stay for the final drill into the concrete. I didn't need to. The plaque would outlast every false narrative they ever wrote about me. Let them spin their stories. I'd written mine in ink and deed. As I stood near the gravel drive, letting the early wind graze my skin, I felt something loosen. Not fall apart, just fall away. Like shedding a coat that never fit. Sometimes family doesn't raise you. Sometimes it's the strangers who never needed to love you, but did anyway. The bus driver who waited when you were late. The teacher who stayed after class. The grandmother who made space without asking you to shrink first. I turned back toward the building, now fully mine, and whispered, not to anyone in particular. I didn't leave to be seen. I left to see myself. 3 months passed, long enough for things to settle, but not enough for people like my family to forget. Not truly. They don't remember details. They remember optics. And the optics had shifted. That morning, as I stood on the second-floor balcony of the resort, my resort, I watched the event staff finish setting up the relaunch ceremony. White chairs on polished stone, hydrangeas imported from Santa Barbara, a modest arch draped in chiffon. Clean, quiet, elegant. No one from my family was invited. Not that they'd care. Not that they even knew. Well, not yet. I walked the venue in a navy sheath dress. The same one my mother once called cheap-looking at a Christmas brunch. Her exact words were, "Try something with structure, sweetheart. You always look like you're drowning in basics." That was the year Branson's wife showed up in a $1,200 dress and got a standing ovation for her side hustle making baby food pouches. Now, that cheap dress moved through the crowd of Napa executives, real estate developers, and hospitality insiders without drawing so much as a whisper, except maybe, "Who is she?" My name wasn't on the speaker list. I hadn't planned to say anything. But when the resort manager introduced the woman responsible for the rebirth of this historic property, and every head turned my way, I didn't flinch. I stepped forward and smiled like I'd rehearsed it. "Thank you," I said into the mic, "for being here. Not just to celebrate a building, but to witness something a little harder to rebuild. Identity." There was a pause. Respectful, quiet. I had them. I know what it feels like to be in a room and not be seen. To exist just outside the frame, behind the scenes, beneath the surface. That's where I lived for a long time. I didn't name names. I didn't point fingers. I didn't need to. I didn't build this place to prove anything. I built it because I was tired of disappearing. There's a difference between leaving quietly and being silenced. I left a house, not a family. Because a family, at least to me, is where you're allowed to exist without auditioning for the role. Applause came slower than I expected, but when it did, it stayed with me longer than most things ever had. After the event, I slipped away before anyone could corner me for a quote. I didn't want sound bites. I wanted peace. But the internet doesn't believe in peace. 2 days later, a hospitality blogger posted a blurry photo of me beside the new resort signage. "Meet the woman behind the Cecilia." The caption underneath read, "She's not just the new owner. She's the reason it didn't go under." The post gained traction, then speed, then fire. My inbox flooded with messages from former coworkers, past acquaintances, even 2 cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years. All variations of, "Is this you?" followed by emojis and links. I didn't reply. Then my phone vibrated again. This time, a text from a number I hadn't seen in a while. "Mom." The message was short. Are you the Cecilia woman everyone's talking about? I stared at the screen, read it twice, then let the phone fall face down on the table. That evening, I poured myself a glass of red and opened my laptop, half intending to draft a reply, half thinking I might delete it all. Instead, I stumbled on a folder labeled Unsent. Inside was a draft email I'd written months ago, addressed to my parents. It said, "I built something beautiful, but I never wanted to use it against you." I hovered over the send button, then I closed the window and hit delete. I didn't owe anyone my softness, not anymore. The resort lights flickered on as the sun began to dip. I stood at the balcony, looking down at a place they used to claim as theirs, taking credit for finding it, loving it, making it special. That was the lie they liked to pass around, that their legacy was what gave this place value. They'd be furious if they found out it was mine now, but they wouldn't say it directly. No, they'd find a more subtle way to say it, something like, "We just thought it would have stayed in the family." That was the thing, it never was. And just as I let that thought settle into my chest, my phone rang again. Not press. Not an investor. Dad. The name lit up the screen like a flare in the dark. I didn't move. I didn't pick up. I didn't need to. Because if he was calling, it wasn't to apologize. It was to ask for something. I didn't answer the call. I didn't need to. Whatever he had to say would arrive another way. With my father, it always did. By mid-morning the next day, a courier showed up at my gate. No signature required. Just a thick white envelope in a manila sleeve, hand-delivered, sealed with embossed initials. It smelled faintly like the aftershave he used to wear. Woodsy, overbearing. A scent that lingered too long after he'd left the room. I opened it at the kitchen counter, next to the coffee I hadn't touched since it cooled. The paper was thick, expensive. Of course it was. The first page was a letter, typed, formal, stiff as cardboard. The kind that uses phrases like continued goodwill and amicable resolution. My parents, through their attorney, were requesting what they called a fair and honorable contribution toward decades of parental investment. They'd listed exact figures: tuition, summer camps, orthodontics, health insurance premiums, even groceries. The spreadsheet was titled, in all caps, Estimated Value of Upbringing. It included a suggested total, just shy of $620,000. They had itemized affection. I didn't laugh. I didn't rage. I sat down and read it line by line like it was a contract, because maybe that's all I ever was to them. A poorly performing asset looking to be offloaded with whatever payout they could spin into virtue. That night, I barely slept. Not because of the demand, but because of the precision. The gall of treating parenthood like a loan agreement. And me, a balance sheet to settle. 2 days later, I noticed movement on the perimeter camera at the front gate. I opened the app. There he was. Merrick Hoyt, my father. Standing with his hands behind his back, like a man visiting a grave he didn't really care about, but felt obligated to stop by. I didn't go out. I hit the intercom. "This isn't a place for drop-ins," I said flatly. He didn't flinch. "You always did like distance." "This is not the way to fix anything," I said. "I didn't come to fix. I came to speak." "There's nothing to say. You had years." He sighed, loud enough for the audio to pick up. "You were always hard to love, Del." I should have felt gutted. I didn't. Maybe because I'd heard it before. Maybe not those exact words, but enough close cousins of that phrase to know where I stood. I ended the call. Later that day, I had my legal team draft a response. Clear, cold, professional. "There will be no payment," the letter read. "The emotional labor extracted under the guise of familial duty has long exceeded your valuation." I attached the footage of him at my gate. Not to threaten, just to document. My lawyer called later that afternoon. "They'll go public," she said. "You know that, right?" "Let them," I replied. "They don't know how to stay quiet unless they're being ignored." And just like clockwork, 3 days later, an anonymous Facebook post started making rounds in our old neighborhood group. The kind of post written to sound humble, but carefully constructed to spread like wildfire. "Please pray for us," it began. "Our daughter, who's done well for herself, has chosen to cut ties. After all we've given, after all we've done." There was a photo attached, grainy. Me, walking out of the TEDx venue, cropped just enough to erase the signage, but leave the body language. I looked like I was rushing away from something shameful. The post closed with, "Sometimes success makes people forget where they came from." By midnight, it had been shared over 300 times. I clicked Save Post. I didn't comment. I didn't correct. I just watched. The next morning, I woke to 3 canceled meetings. A software partner backed out, citing concerns about recent personal press. One of my early investors requested a private conversation. And there it was. The plan. Not to take money, not even to win, but to stain. Make me small enough that whatever I'd built would feel shaky again, like I didn't deserve it, like I was too damaged to be trusted at the helm of anything more than grief. I stared out at the lavender field behind my kitchen, the breeze pushing purple blossoms in gentle waves. And I thought, this is why they raised me to be silent, so that when they screamed, no one would hear my side first. But they forgot one thing. I own my voice now. And no matter what came next, they couldn't take that back. That night, I didn't celebrate. I opened my laptop, and I rewrote every contract they ever hid behind. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by paper, bank statements, legal drafts, signed agreements with embossed logos. My attorney, Tamsin, had sent over everything I'd need if things escalated. She didn't say when, she said if, but we both knew better. By sunrise, my name was everywhere. Not because of the resort, not because of the TEDx talk, but because of the post. The one they seeded with just enough guilt to feel like scripture. Daughter makes millions and leaves her parents behind. No calls, no support, no visits. It had a photo, blurred of course, one they probably didn't take themselves, but encouraged someone else to share. A picture of me, walking across the parking lot in sunglasses and a linen blazer, like I was dodging cameras instead of heading to my car. The caption underneath read, "She forgot where she came from." Within hours, the coverage shifted from hospitality triumph to personal scandal. Commentators called me cold. One morning, Anchor referred to me as the billionaire who left her folks to rot. My inbox filled with meeting cancellations. One client cited values misalignment. Another said, "We just need to let the media cycle cool down." I didn't respond to any of it. I just called Tamsin. "Send the file," I told her. She didn't ask which one. 2 days later, the courtroom smelled of carpet glue and nerves. The kind of smell you don't notice unless you've sat in rooms where families break each other slowly through polite arguments and legal terms that feel clinical even when they're cutting deep. My parents sat 3 rows ahead of me. Merrick in a charcoal suit too sharp for sincerity, and Verlene in a navy blouse I remember from every graduation I ever had. Always worn like armor, never joy. Their lawyer was a man named Craig. Of course it was Craig, all firm jaw and practiced outrage. He stood and started with words like neglect, emotional harm, and moral dereliction. He painted me as a woman who had climbed out of their sacrifices and kicked the ladder away on the way up. I didn't flinch. Not when he brought up their support during her formative years. Not when he referenced the emotional weight borne by aging parents discarded in their twilight. And when he called me ungrateful, I just breathed through it. Then it was our turn. Tamsin didn't speak loudly. She didn't need to. She moved with the precision of someone who knew that silence had weight when you placed it in the right corners. She pulled up a screen. "I'd like to present a collection of communications between Ms. Hoyt and her parents," she said, including a voicemail dated 2 years ago from Merrick Hoyt. The video played. The audio was crisp. "You're good with numbers, Delphine," Merrick's voice said through the speakers. "That's what you are, a glorified maid with a calculator." Gasps, then murmurs. The kind of hum that means people aren't quite shocked, just newly certain of something they'd suspected. The next clip was of my mother. I remembered that call. I hadn't saved it out of spite. I'd saved it because something in my gut told me I might need it one day. I don't know what she's wearing. It looks like she bought it from a clearance bin at Ross. She never had taste, never had polish. Someone in the audience coughed awkwardly. The judge looked up, and that was before Branson's voice joined the chorus, laughing in the background. Tamsin didn't say much after that. She didn't have to. The judge asked if there was context, if anyone else could verify what had been played. I didn't expect what came next. Glenora Pike walked in. My cousin. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not in stature, in weight, in how she carried herself. Like she had finally decided to put something down and walk without it. She was sworn in, sat down, and told the court what I had never asked anyone to say out loud. I was there, she said. Every Christmas, every dinner, every birthday. She paused. They'd talk over her, around her, like she wasn't even seated at the same table. Once, they thanked the caterer at Dad's retirement party, but not Delphine, even though she planned the whole thing. She pulled out her phone, played a voicemail forwarded from her mother. Verlene's voice again. Del was never like us. She's useful, not family. The room didn't make a sound for 3 full seconds. Then the judge adjusted his glasses. Case dismissed, he said. I didn't smile. As I stood to leave, reporters began to gather outside. I stepped through the glass doors into the light and said only this. I never abandoned them. I left before they could. Later that evening, as my legal team wrapped up paperwork, we delivered one final motion, one they weren't expecting. A restraining order. For both of them. It wasn't spite, it was protection. Because even adults who've grown out of childhood wounds can still bleed if someone keeps cutting in the same place. The headlines faded within 2 weeks. The interviews dried up, the hashtags cooled, and the world moved on. As it always does when outrage exhausts itself. The silence that followed was different. This one I chose. One Sunday morning, after my usual walk along the ridge behind the resort, I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and recorded a 6-minute video. No makeup, no script. Just me, a soft cotton sweater, and a truth I wasn't ashamed of anymore. No, I didn't leave out of hate, I said, looking straight into the lens. I left because love wasn't a language we shared, not in that house. I spoke slowly. No names, no direct accusations. Just moments, snapshots that lived in my chest for too long. Sometimes people raise you to make you useful, not to make you feel loved. Sometimes you don't even realize what was missing until you try to build something different, something that doesn't hurt. The video was raw but not bitter. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about them. It was about me, finally stepping out from under the need to explain. Within hours, it crossed 2 million views. The comments poured in. You just told my story. I didn't know how much I needed to hear this until now. You said what I've never been able to say to my own parents. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. That same week, my parents were spotted in town. Same grocery store, same post-church routine. But this time, someone approached them. Mr. Weldon Avery, our old neighbor from when I was 8, apparently saw them in the parking lot and walked up. I wasn't there, but a friend who still lived in the area called me about it that night. He didn't say it loud, she told me, but he said it plain. You didn't lose a daughter, you never made room for one. According to her, Verlene froze. Just stood there, holding a bag of apples like the air had left her lungs. Merrick muttered something about people not knowing the full story, but his face gave him away. He looked embarrassed, not ashamed, just exposed. That moment didn't change anything in the legal sense, but for me, it meant everything. Because for once, someone else said it, and not because I needed defending, but because they needed reminding. Glenora messaged me that same week. It came as a voice memo. the first one she'd sent since the day she testified. "I'm not calling to apologize," she said. "I figure if I have to say sorry, I probably don't mean it yet." She paused. "But I see it now. I see all of it. They never let you be you. And I was part of that. I laughed when they joked about your shoes. I stood by when they cut your name from the thank you speech." There was another long pause. "You don't need me to stand beside you, but I will, if you want that." I didn't reply. I didn't know if I wanted that. But I saved the message. Because sometimes recognition is worth more than reconciliation. That night, I sat by the fireplace with a glass of wine and went through old voicemails. Not because I missed them, but because I wanted to clear space. I deleted the message where Merrick asked if I'd finally stopped wasting money on vanity projects. I deleted Verlene's recording where she told me to think about how this looks on us. But I kept one. My grandmother, Cecilia. Soft voice, full of warmth. "Don't worry, baby. You don't have to earn love here." I played that one twice. The next morning, I sat under the old cypress tree near the west lawn of the resort. The same place where guests now came to write, reflect, or just sit with their thoughts. I brought a blank journal, not for the public, not for TEDx, not for another speech, just for me. On the first page, I wrote, "Peace is not the silence of others. It's the end of needing their noise." Then I closed the book. I didn't need to write more that day. Sometimes the most powerful sentence is the one that doesn't chase approval. Later that week, I walked the perimeter trail around the property and passed by a mother and daughter staying for the weekend. The girl couldn't have been more than 10. She pointed to the plaque that read, "The Cecilia, a sanctuary of renewal." "Who's Cecilia?" she asked. The mom smiled and said, "Probably someone important." She had no idea how right she was. Forgiveness is not an invitation. It's just the end of pursuit. 6 months later, I found myself in front of a familiar building, a squat brick bank tucked into a quiet corner of a town that once called me one of their own. I hadn't stepped foot there since I was 21, the summer I tried to open my first business account. Back then, the manager asked if I had a husband to co-sign, and my mother told him not to worry, she just likes to play CEO. Now I was there with my lawyer, a file folder under my arm, and a signed termination document ready to be processed. The cabin had sat on land adjacent to my resort for decades. Technically owned by a holding company my father used to navigate tax loopholes, it had always been his space. But he'd long since transferred the legal claim without realizing the implications. I let him think he still controlled it, until now. "I'm donating the parcel," I told the clerk behind the window. "Transfer it to the Wildwood Foundation. They run housing programs for single mothers." The woman's eyes widened. "You're giving it away?" "I'm giving it back," I said, "to someone who might actually use it to protect people." Behind me, Tamsin gave a small nod. She'd warned me this might stir something. Headlines, family outrage, Facebook group drama. I didn't care. "They'll say you're petty," she reminded me in the parking lot afterward, sliding her sunglasses back on. "Let them," I said. "They used to call me invisible. This is an upgrade." By the end of that week, the paperwork was processed, the cabin keys delivered, the locks changed. I didn't expect thanks. I didn't need them. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of everything that came before were starting to show. Branson, I'd heard through mutual connections, had checked into a rehab center out in Marin, not paid for by family, but sponsored by an old college roommate he hadn't spoken to in years. Apparently, people outside your circle are more likely to throw you a rope when you finally fall out of the one that kept you suffocating. Verlene stopped attending her usual luncheons. One woman from the Rotary Club told an acquaintance of mine that she looked thinner, quieter, and less curated. She wasn't used to being watched without admiration. Merrick still taught part-time, but his name had been removed from the board of a local nonprofit he once chaired. No public announcement, no statement, just gone. The kind of quiet removal you don't notice until someone else's name is printed where yours used to be. And me? I got a letter. No return address. Handwritten. Short. You've made your point. No signature. I didn't even finish reading it. I smiled, fed it into my shredder, and went on with my day. Some people mistake silence for surrender. Others use it as shelter. But me, I'd learned that the best peace isn't the kind you have to prove. It's the kind you never have to defend. One afternoon, I drove through my old neighborhood. Not for nostalgia. I didn't need memory to keep me company anymore. I stopped in front of the house I grew up in, now aged and tired, just like the people who once ruled it. I didn't knock. I didn't need to see anyone. Instead, I pulled out a photograph I'd printed that morning. A snapshot of my grandmother and me, sitting on the porch of the Cecilia, back when it was just a dream scribbled in my notebook. We were laughing, real belly-deep joy, not the curated kind my mother used to force before holiday dinners. On the back, I wrote, "She was my family. She still is." I folded it once, slipped it into the mailbox, and drove away without looking back. That evening, back at the resort, I hosted a small gathering for young women in business. Mentorship Roundtable, they called it. I didn't speak from a stage. I sat among them, sleeves rolled, legs crossed, same old navy sheath dress I'd worn the day I claimed my name. One woman, barely 30, asked me, "How did you forgive them?" I sipped my water, smiled gently, and said, "I didn't. I just stopped giving them a voice in my story." There was a pause, a breath of understanding. Later, as the sun dropped behind the vineyard, I stood on the west balcony of the main lodge and let the silence stretch. My voice, in the back of my mind, not broken, not forced, rose again. "You don't owe healing to those who caused the wound," I thought. "You owe it to the part of yourself that survived. Because in the end, some doors aren't meant to stay open. Not all families are broken. Some are just finished. And that's okay." Hi, I'm Sedona. I used to think being the quiet one in the family meant peace, but it turns out it just made me easier to erase. They told me to postpone my wedding for my sister's emotions. Then they didn't show up at all. Later, I found out the guest list had been altered, money transferred from my account, and my face missing from my own photos. But what hurt most wasn't what they took. It was realizing they never saw me as part of the story to begin with. And when I finally spoke up, they sued me. What kind of family does that? And what happened when I finally stood up for myself? On the record? When I told my parents I was getting married, it was over meatloaf and mashed potatoes at the same dinner table I'd grown up around. Same creaky chairs, same butter dish, same unspoken tension. I had barely finished the sentence. "Daryl proposed?" When Mom put her fork down, slowly, like she was bracing for an aftertaste she didn't ask for. Dad looked over his glasses but didn't say a word. It was Rhiannon's name that broke the silence, of course. "Do you think this is really the right time?" Mom said, tilting her head just enough to pretend it was concern. "You know Rhiannon's barely keeping it together. All those therapy bills, she hasn't even processed the breakup." I nodded. Of course I did. I always did. I folded my napkin, took a sip of my iced tea, and pretended I wasn't swallowing disappointment. Mom went on, "Maybe just give it a little time, a few months, until your sister's in a better place." So I postponed my engagement announcement. I let them finish dinner, talking about Rhiannon's latest yoga retreat and how she was thinking about starting a candle line. The silence around my news? That wasn't new, but that night, it felt heavier. 8 months later, I got married. I sent out invitations, digital and physical. Daryl and I paid for everything ourselves, and every detail mattered. Not because it had to be perfect, but because it was mine. It was finally mine. On the morning of the wedding, I checked my phone 3 times. No message from Mom, no call from Dad. At 10:42 a.m., a text finally came in. "We're not coming. Rhiannon didn't sleep last night. She's in a fragile state. It wouldn't feel right to leave her alone today." No apology. No excuse beyond that. Just, don't expect us. When I walked down that aisle, I saw every chair filled, except two in the front row. No flowers, no ribbons, just the imprint of people who should have been there but chose not to be. Dariel's mom, Angela, cried through the whole ceremony. She danced with me later when I didn't have a father-daughter moment. She even helped bustle my dress. At the reception, while people buzzed and clinked glasses, a man I barely knew, someone from Dariel's old office, walked up to me and asked, "Your folks get lost on the way here?" I smiled, the kind that stretches tight but doesn't touch your eyes. No, just lost in their priorities. I excused myself, found the bridal suite, and shut the door. It wasn't until I sat down, alone with the noise muffled behind the wall, that my body finally let go. My hands shook, my throat clenched, but I didn't cry. Not really, just leaked a little grief I'd been holding since that dinner over meatloaf. Later that night, when everyone was drunk or dancing or both, I looked back at those two empty chairs. They stayed untouched the entire evening. Even the caterers asked me if they should remove them. I told them no, let them sit, let them be a monument. I wasn't angry, not yet. I told myself it was fine, that I'd expected too much. But then, while packing up after the reception, I walked over to the gift table. Something felt off. I counted twice. Then again. Envelopes were missing. I didn't say anything right away. I just stared at the table, like maybe I'd miscounted. Like I could will the envelopes to reappear if I stood still long enough. But deep down, I already knew something wasn't right. 2 days later, Dariel and I sat at our small dining table, the one with a leg that wobbled slightly no matter how many times he'd tried to fix it. We were sorting through cards and gifts, writing thank you notes with the kind of tired joy only newlyweds understand. But something didn't add up. I thought your Uncle Rob gave us a check, I asked, flipping through a stack of cards. He did. I remember him slipping it in a gold envelope, Dariel said without looking up. Said he wanted us to use it for a honeymoon cabin. I went back through the pile. Nothing gold, nothing from Rob, or Aunt Claudia, or the Myers family. At least 6 envelopes we both remembered had vanished. That's when Dariel said, "Hang on, let me pull the security cam footage from the venue. I think the gift table was in frame." While he worked on that, I scrolled through text messages. One from my mother popped up from the night of the wedding. Short, dismissive. Rhiannon took a few envelopes home to keep them safe. She'll bring them by next week. I hadn't thought much of it then. I was too exhausted, too emotionally spent to read between the lines. But now it tasted sour. Dariel tilted the laptop toward me. There, see that? The footage was grainy, but clear enough. Rhiannon, alone at the gift table, looking around before slipping several envelopes into her designer tote bag. She wasn't frantic. She wasn't panicked. She looked like someone cleaning up after a party, like it was her event. "They'll bring them by," I repeated under my breath, then shut my phone off. They never did. Later that week, I stopped by my parents' house to grab a storage bin I'd left in the garage, wedding decor, that hadn't made it to the venue. It was supposed to be a quick in and out. I didn't even take my coat off. But the house was empty, and as I walked through the hallway toward the garage, something pulled me toward the guest room, my old room. I don't know why I opened the closet. I hadn't slept there in years. But there it was, my mom's old jewelry box, the one she used to keep locked, the one she'd scolded me for touching when I was 11. It was unlocked now, sitting on the top shelf like it had been forgotten. I opened it. Inside were a few trinkets, pearls, cufflinks, a tiny gold cross from her first communion. And then, beneath it all, folded neatly, was a pink envelope. The stationery looked expensive, the kind that leaves a faint shimmer under the light. It was a letter, a real one, handwritten, flowing and elegant in a way I didn't know my mother's handwriting could be. To my beautiful Rhiannon. I sat down on the edge of the bed as I read. You are everything I ever dreamed of in a daughter. Your grace, your beauty, your strength. Watching you walk across that stage at your modeling showcase was one of the proudest moments of my life. I see so much of myself in you, and I know, without a doubt, you are destined for great things. I couldn't breathe. My eyes scanned the rest of the page, looking for context. A date, 3 years ago. It wasn't the words that gutted me. It was knowing they existed at all. I had never received anything like that, not even close. I folded the letter back with care, slid it into its envelope, and returned it to its spot. Then I stood up, walked out, and left the bin behind. I didn't need one more reminder of what they'd chosen not to give me. Outside, the wind had picked up. My car smelled faintly of lavender from the sachet Darielle had tucked under the seat last month. I sat behind the wheel, hands resting at 10 and 2, and stared at the dashboard clock as the numbers flipped forward. For the longest time, I told myself the distance between me and my family was circumstantial, that we'd just fallen out of rhythm, that people change, that I was busy, that they were distracted. But it's funny, when someone stays emotionally absent long enough, you start inventing reasons for them. Not to protect them, to protect yourself. You start building excuses because the idea that they simply chose not to love you the same, that's unbearable. I didn't text my mom that I'd been there. I didn't follow up about the missing envelopes. I didn't mention the footage. I didn't say anything. That night, while Dariel slept with a hand draped over my waist, I lay awake watching the ceiling fan spin. My chest didn't feel heavy. It felt hollow. The next day, I made coffee, checked work emails, and went on like nothing happened. Like I hadn't found written proof that my mother had a favorite child and wasn't even ashamed of it. I didn't say anything, yet, but something inside me was shifting. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was certainty. Maybe there was never meant to be a letter for me. Maybe I was never meant to be in her story at all. I didn't sleep much after that. I wasn't angry, not in the way people expect. It was quieter than that. A strange stillness, like hearing the echo of your own breath in a house you grew up in that no longer feels like home. 3 mornings later, a package from the photographer arrived. Darielle left it on the kitchen counter before heading to work. "Your photos came," he said casually, not knowing how heavy that sentence would land. I waited until lunchtime. I made myself a sandwich, took 2 bites, pushed the plate aside, and opened the USB drive on my laptop. The first image came up. It wasn't me. It was Rhiannon, in a champagne-colored dress, standing in front of the floral arch I'd chosen. She was smiling, posed like it was her engagement. I clicked through the files. Group shots where Rhiannon was always in the middle, laughing with my bridesmaids, holding the bouquet. The bouquet I paid for. The bouquet I held when I stood alone at the altar without my parents. I scrolled further. No close-up of me during the vows. No shots of Dariel's tears, when I said I'd never known unconditional love until him. Just Rhiannon beaming beside the cake. I called the photographer. Tried to keep my tone light, polite. "Hey, I just got the preview album. Did some shots get left out?" There was a pause, papers rustling. "Oh, I think your mom requested which ones to include for the print draft. She emailed me about it a few days after the wedding." My jaw tightened. "I don't remember that." "Yeah," she said, cheerful, unaware. "The email came from her address. She wanted more of your sister. Said it'd be good for family keepsakes." I thanked her, hung up, and just stared at the laptop screen. Of course. Of course they wanted to remember Rhiannon, because remembering me would mean facing what they chose not to show up for. That weekend, we went to brunch with Dariel's side of the family. I wore a denim jacket and forced myself to smile. Mavis, my aunt from Michigan, sat across from me, sipping her tea. "We were really surprised not to get the final RSVP," she said between bites of toast. "We thought maybe it was a small private ceremony. Didn't want to push." I froze. "Wait, you never got your invite?" She shook her head. "Nope. We got the save the date, but nothing after. Claudia said the same thing." My fingers curled around my mug. "I sent those out myself. I double-checked every name. Mavis shrugged. Maybe it got lost in the mail? 3 more people, extended family, brought up the same thing over the next few days. People I knew I'd included. People I had wanted there. Back home, I opened the RSVP dashboard Daryl helped me set up. It let us track who opened, responded, declined. At first glance, everything looked fine. But when I clicked into the back-end log, something only someone with admin access could do, I saw the problem. Dozens of invites had been opened, then deleted. The IP address? Logged under an alternate email labeled rjennings.archive. I recognized the recovery phone number. It was Rhiannon's. No one else had the login credentials, except her. Because Mom had said, "Let your sister help. She's good with planning." I didn't tell Daryl right away. I needed time to process it on my own. Instead, I printed the email logs. I highlighted the timestamps. I took screenshots. Then I emailed them to myself, subject line, "In case I forget." That night, after dinner, Daryl asked me if I wanted to watch a movie. I said I needed a hot bath first. I soaked in silence, eyes closed, head back, the sound of the faucet dripping in slow rhythm. My body felt tired, but my mind was sorting. They didn't forget me. They erased me. They edited me out of my own celebration, like I was an afterthought, like my love story was a footnote in someone else's autobiography. And erasure isn't passive, it's a conscious act. You don't accidentally cut someone from every group photo. You don't unintentionally delete their guests from a list. That's not carelessness. That's cruelty, dressed in politeness, wrapped in silence. So no, I didn't cry. Not then. I just made a new folder on my computer. I named it Truth. I dragged the screenshots in. I started cataloging. Because I wasn't spiraling, I wasn't shrinking, I was preparing. The next week slipped by in fragments, work emails, grocery lists, and a few nights where I thought I might actually forget what they did. I didn't. But for the sake of getting through the day, I played along with normal. Thursday afternoon, I was sorting tax documents at the kitchen table, trying to get everything ready for our accountant. Daryl was at work, and I had the place to myself. Our coffee maker sputtered in the background while I printed off receipts and contracts we'd need to itemize deductions from the wedding. When I opened the venue folder on my laptop, a PDF caught my eye. It had been emailed directly to me by the events manager, marked as finalized copy. I clicked it without thinking. Then I stopped breathing. There it was. The signature line, primary contract holder, Rhiannon Jennings. My fingers hovered above the touchpad. I scrolled back up. Everything looked like it should have, except it didn't. My name was only mentioned once, as the honored guest. The client listed was Rhiannon, her email, her phone number, her name on every line that mattered. I blinked, once, twice, 3 times. I went into my transaction history, pulled up the deposit I'd made in person 6 months ago. Cash. Paid in full. I remembered the visit clearly. I'd taken a half-day off to meet the venue coordinator myself. The next email notification came in 2 hours later. Subject: quick note from Rhiannon Jennings. Hey sis, since I took care of the deposit and contract, it would be great if you could Venmo me your half. $250 should cover it. No rush. I stared at the screen like it had slapped me. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Instead, I printed the PDF, added it to the Truth folder, and took a screenshot of the email. Then, I opened the security footage again, Rhiannon at the gift table, casually slipping envelopes into her purse. This wasn't just about attention anymore. This was about money. The following afternoon, I stopped by my parents' house. I had a small package addressed to them, a framed photo from the wedding of Darielle and me. The one picture I had where I still looked like a bride. It felt polite to share it, even though it felt hollow doing so. Mom wasn't home. Dad didn't come to the door, but Letitia, our part-time housekeeper, was outside near the garage, sorting trash bags. I almost waved and left, but something about her face made me pause. "Sedona?" she asked, tucking her gloves into her apron. "You doing okay?" I hesitated. I'm managing. She stepped a little closer, then lowered her voice. You didn't hear it from me. But a month before your wedding, I overheard a conversation between your mom and Rhiannon. Letitia glanced back at the door. They were in the kitchen, whispering. Something about keeping the guest list clean and making sure the day didn't turn into a pity parade. I didn't say a word. I just stood there still, while the wind rustled through the trash bags. They talked like it was for your benefit, like you'd be overwhelmed if there were too many people. But then I heard your mom say— She paused, lowered her eyes. We just can't have the wrong child be the center of attention. My stomach turned cold. Letitia met my gaze. I didn't know what to say. I figured it wasn't my place. But you deserve to know. It wasn't a mistake. They planned it. I swallowed hard and nodded. Thank you for telling me. That night, after Daryl went to bed, I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself for a long time. Not to judge what I saw, not to cry, just to witness myself. I thought about how many times I'd been asked to shrink, to be flexible, to let things go for the sake of the family. How many times I'd told myself it wasn't that bad, that I was being sensitive, that maybe it really was just miscommunication. But contracts aren't miscommunications. Invoices don't lie. And people don't accidentally assign credit for your life to someone else. I pulled my hair back into a bun, washed my face, brushed my teeth. Then I sat down at my computer and opened a new document. I typed one line at the top. They've turned this into a transaction, so I'll treat it like one. This wasn't a misstep. This was strategy. Control disguised as kindness. Theft dressed in silk. They'd taken my wedding, my story, my name, and they'd handed it to the person they'd always considered the real star of the family. So fine, let them have the spotlight. I was building something quieter, but far more permanent. After saving the PDF and closing the laptop, I didn't go to bed. I couldn't. My hands were steady, but my chest carried a kind of still tension I hadn't felt since the night of the wedding. I walked out to the porch and let the cold air hit me. The street was silent. No cars, no footsteps, just the occasional rustle of wind through bare branches. I stood there for a long while, thinking. When I came back inside, I sat down at the desk again and messaged James, Darielle's cousin. He'd casually mentioned filming parts of the wedding on his DSLR, mostly for fun. He wasn't a professional, but I remembered him being meticulous about camera angles. Hey, I typed, any chance you still have the raw footage from the wedding? He responded within 10 minutes. Yep, I've got everything on a hard drive. You want it? Yes. He dropped it off the next morning on his way to work. No questions asked, just a plastic case with a Post-it on top. Hope it helps. I waited until Daryl left for a site visit before plugging it in. The files were unedited, time-stamped, unpolished. I started with the footage from the ceremony, expecting shaky hands or background noise. What I got was something else entirely. There she was, my mother, arms wide open as she greeted Rhiannon at the venue entrance. A kiss on the cheek, a compliment about her dress. You look radiant, honey. I didn't hear her say that to me. Then Rhiannon, standing next to me as we were getting lined up for photos, tugging at my bouquet. Not your color, really, she whispered with a half laugh, as if my peach-toned arrangement offended her personal aesthetic. Later, I watched my mom wave the photographer away from a group shot. Let's get one with just Rhiannon and the girls, she said dismissively, as if I was just another person on the periphery. I was standing right there. The last nail was a toast, completely impromptu. Rhiannon had grabbed the mic during the reception, smiled as she thanked everyone for making this a special day for our family. Our family! No mention of me. No acknowledgement that it was my wedding day, that I was the bride. I watched my face in the background. I wasn't smiling, and I wasn't in frame at all for the last 4 minutes of that video. I sat back, arms crossed over my chest, laptop screen casting a cold light onto my face. It wasn't anger that filled me this time. It was confirmation. They didn't just minimize me, they deleted me. On purpose. That afternoon, while heating leftovers in the microwave, a message popped up in my social inbox. Someone I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. Doreen. Back in college, she'd been in a few of my marketing classes. We weren't close, but we'd shared a handful of group projects and mutual eye rolls when Rhiannon visited campus, floating through like she owned the place. The message was short. Hi Sedona, I saw your name mentioned on a wedding thread in a forum. I wasn't sure if it was you, but if it is, I just wanted to say something about your sister. Because what happened to you isn't new. I stared at the message, unsure whether to engage, but curiosity won. We messaged for a while. Doreen told me that Rhiannon had dated a guy named Marcus back in college. He'd been planning to propose to his long-term girlfriend. According to Doreen, Rhiannon found out and inserted herself, became the supportive friend to both parties, then started a rumor that the girlfriend was cheating. The engagement ended 3 weeks later. She told me once, Doreen typed, that if you delay a woman's ring long enough, you get to wear the crown instead. She attached a screenshot, a text from Rhiannon. One ring delayed is a crown retained. I didn't need more proof, but I saved it anyway. That night, I created a new folder inside my truth file. I named it Pattern. James's footage went in. Doreen's screenshot, a copy of the venue contract, the RSVP deletion logs, screenshots of Rhiannon at the gift table, every lie they told, every move they made while I was too distracted or too polite to push back. Daryl came home to find me organizing documents on the floor like a puzzle. You okay? He asked. I nodded. I am now. Because this wasn't about revenge. This was about record. They had curated a version of the wedding, of my life, that fit their comfort. I had let them. I had swallowed it all to keep peace. But now, peace looked like truth, even if it was uncomfortable. I opened a blank email, addressed it to a legal contact one of my friends had recommended after her own family lawsuit the year before. I didn't write much, just a subject line, intent to respond, and one sentence. They've crafted their story for too long. I'm ready to present mine. I hit send. Then I closed the laptop, stood up, and poured myself a glass of water. The house was quiet. Darielle was in the shower. The night was calm, but I wasn't in hiding anymore. The email was sent. The folder was organized. I had built a wall of proof, brick by digital brick. But still, I didn't expect the knock on the door that came the following Tuesday morning. It was just after 10 a.m. I was still in sweats, folding laundry in the living room, when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw a man in a gray blazer holding a thick envelope. My stomach tensed. Sedona Jennings? He asked. I nodded. You've been served. He handed me the envelope, turned, and walked away before I even spoke. Back inside, I placed the envelope on the counter and stared at it like it might bite. Daryl came in from the garage a few minutes later and saw me frozen in place. You okay? He asked. Rhiannon's suing me. I said it flat, like I was reading a headline off the news. He didn't ask if I was serious. He just put a hand on my back and waited while I opened it. The allegations were bold: defamation of character, intentional infliction of emotional distress, creating a toxic environment within the family, and at the bottom, her witness list. My mother, Velma. There it was, in black ink, an affidavit signed by the woman who gave birth to me, saying she had observed Sedona's patterns of jealousy and manipulation over the years, and feared the emotional impact her behavior had on Rhiannon's mental health. Daryl read it all, jaw tight, eyes scanning each page like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. I didn't cry. I laughed, short, humorless. She's painting me like some hysterical villain in a movie she directed. I set the envelope aside and pulled out my laptop. They want a show? I muttered. Fine. I'll give them a script with receipts. That night, after dinner, I logged into the bank account Daryl and I had opened for wedding-related expenses. We hadn't touched it in weeks, but something had been bothering me. A vague memory, half-formed and ignored. 3 days before the ceremony, a transfer had been made. $2,000 gone, sent to an account I didn't recognize. Daryl hadn't done it. I certainly hadn't. That left one possibility. I remembered Rhiannon offering to help track the budget early on. She'd convinced me to let her sync the spreadsheets. "You've got so much on your plate already," she'd said, with a practiced smile and false warmth. "Let me take that off your hands." I logged into the admin panel of the finance app we'd used and pulled the IP logs. The same IP address that had accessed and deleted RSVP data. It had authorized that $2,000 transfer. I stared at the screen, rage simmering under my skin like a low flame. $2,000. My money, moved quietly, disguised as a favor, disappeared into whatever void Rhiannon had carved for herself. I documented it all, screenshots, timestamps, internal email alerts. Then I called the bank and flagged the transfer. "Possible unauthorized activity," I said calmly. They opened a case immediately. The next twist came 2 nights later. I was just finishing dishes when my phone rang. Mavis. "Hey, kiddo," she said, her voice unusually sharp. "You have a minute?" "Sure. Everything okay?" "I just left a dinner at your mom's. I'm sorry, I have to tell you something." I walked into the living room, sat down. "Go ahead." She was laughing, telling this story about how dramatic you always were as a kid, called you a walking guilt trip, said, and I quote, "She never grew out of needing to feel wronged." Everyone chuckled. I felt heat rush to my cheeks. "I couldn't just sit there," Mavis continued, "so I recorded it. I didn't mean to, it just happened. I had my phone in my lap. I didn't respond right away. "You want me to send it?" she asked gently. "Please," I said. The audio came through 20 minutes later. My mother's voice, light and airy, like she was discussing a recipe, not her daughter. "You know Sedona," she said with a soft chuckle. "She's been performing since she was 10, always so wounded. If you look at her too long, she'll think you hate her." They all laughed. A few clinks of cutlery. Someone said, "Well, some people just live for the drama." It was all there. Casual, cruel, cozy. I saved the file and emailed it to my attorney with the subject line, Exhibit A, Character. That weekend, Daryl and I drove to the lake to clear our heads. We didn't talk much. He held my hand on the drive, squeezed it when I didn't realize I needed grounding. We walked the trail around the water in silence, our boots crunching on dried leaves. Halfway around the loop, I stopped and looked out across the rippling surface. A family was nearby, tossing bread to ducks, laughing as the wind tangled their scarves. I turned to Daryl and said, "They turned on me." He looked at me. "I know." "But I'm not walking into that courtroom broken," I said. "I'm walking in prepared." He nodded. "And you won't be walking in alone." I smiled, just a little. Back at home, I opened a new folder. Legal. Everything went in. Dated, labeled, ordered. They had drawn the battle lines. They thought they could shame me into silence, use reputation as a weapon, twist concern into manipulation, mask betrayal as protection. But I wasn't asking for approval anymore. I was submitting evidence. I submitted the final folder to my lawyer that Friday. By Monday morning, we were in court. Daryl took off work to sit beside me. He didn't ask if I wanted him there. He just showed up, suit jacket draped over his arm, holding my favorite granola bar like it was armor. I didn't eat it, but I appreciated the gesture. The courtroom wasn't grand. It smelled faintly of floor wax and old paper, like most municipal buildings do. There was no dramatic music, no pounding gavels, just beige walls and straight-backed chairs that made you sit up whether you wanted to or not. Rhiannon entered like she was stepping onto a movie set. She wore a cream blouse buttoned to the collar, a soft gray skirt, and just enough makeup to look like she hadn't tried. Her hair was pulled into a low bun. She looked demure, wounded, saintly. Velma sat behind her, hands folded neatly in her lap, lips pressed into a thin line of maternal concern. When our eyes met, she blinked. That was all. The judge, a man who looked like he'd rather be fishing than settling a family feud, called us to order. The first part of the hearing was Rhiannon's. Her attorney led her gently through the testimony. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue when she described how my baseless accusations had affected her emotionally, how her social media partnerships had pulled back, how she felt unsafe, publicly smeared by someone who was supposed to be family. "I've never wanted anything but peace," she said, voice trembling. "But this campaign against me, it's taken a toll on my mental health and my career." I watched her, wondering if she'd practiced that speech in the mirror. I wondered if Velma had helped her rehearse. When it was my lawyer's turn, he stood slowly, calmly. "Your Honor," he said, "we'd like to submit Exhibit B." He handed the clerk a printed email chain. It's a forward from Miss Rhiannon Jennings to her attorney. The subject line reads, quote, "How to frame this to win." The judge raised an eyebrow. The courtroom, until then subdued, rustled with whispers. My lawyer continued, "Within the body of this message, Miss Jennings outlines how she intends to use phrases like emotional distress and defamation strategically, not in response to harm done, but as a tactic to regain control of public perception." Rhiannon's attorney objected on relevance. Overruled. Velma leaned forward, whispering something harsh behind Rhiannon's shoulder. The judge adjusted his glasses and read the email silently for a moment before asking, "Miss Jennings, can you confirm this email is yours?" Rhiannon hesitated. Her throat moved like she'd swallowed glass. I don't remember sending that." "Do you deny it came from your account?" he asked again. She blinked. "No, I don't deny it." That's when things began to shift. My lawyer methodically walked through our timeline. The RSVP tampering the unauthorized money transfer, the gift table footage, the wedding photos she curated, the audio recording from Velma. And now, the email, each one layered like sediment, pressing down on the image Rhiannon had painted. Velma's cousin, who had come just to be polite, stood and quietly exited the gallery. Then Mavis. Then a man I recognized from childhood, my Uncle Alan, who muttered on his way out, "I knew something always felt off about that girl." Rhiannon's composure began to fray. She fumbled through a response about being misunderstood and family dynamics that people on the outside wouldn't understand. But no one was interrupting her now. No one was swooping in to fix it. Darielle leaned closer and whispered, "You haven't said a word, but you've already won the room." I didn't smile, not out of restraint, but because it wasn't joy I felt. It was clarity. This wasn't revenge. This was standing in the truth and refusing to be pulled out of it. The judge called for a short recess. I remained seated while others filed out. I caught a glance from Velma as she passed me. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes looked tired. Tired in the way people get when they realize the script they've followed for years no longer makes sense to the audience. Outside in the hallway, Rhiannon leaned against the wall, checking her phone. I didn't approach her. There was nothing left to say. Back in the courtroom, the judge returned and addressed both parties. "This is not the place to mend family wounds," he began, "but it is the place to determine credibility. And I'm inclined to believe Ms. Jennings has presented a consistent and well-documented account." He didn't deliver a final verdict yet, but his tone left no ambiguity. As we gathered our things, I noticed Velma had left without saying goodbye. It was fine. I didn't need closure from someone still living in a performance. In the parking lot, Darielle opened the car door for me. Before I got in, I looked up at the sky. Clear. Blue. Still. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt whole. We returned to court that Wednesday morning. It was overcast outside, the kind of sky that made everything feel like it was waiting to be decided. Inside the courthouse, the same seats, the same stiff air, the same dull beige walls. But something had shifted. Not in the room, but in me. The judge called my name. I stood. Not because someone had told me to, but because I chose to. He asked if I had anything to say before ruling. My lawyer gave me a small nod. I walked slowly to the front, heart steady, not racing. I didn't bring notes. I didn't practice a speech. I just let the truth rise, sentence by sentence, without needing to dress it up. I was asked to move my wedding for her feelings. I was told it was too soon, too unfair, too complicated for my sister to handle, so I waited. I looked at Rhiannon, but only briefly. Then I was told my wedding didn't matter, that their attendance would be too much for her, that the day I was supposed to be celebrated needed to be quiet, for her sake. I swallowed, but not from nerves, from restraint. Then, when I said nothing, they went further. My guest list was altered. My bank account was tampered with. My gifts disappeared. My photos were edited. My name was left off the contract. And when I finally started asking why, suddenly I was the aggressor. I took a breath. I didn't file this counterclaim to get even. I filed it because, at some point, you have to stop asking for someone else to tell your story right, and start telling it yourself. When I returned to my seat, the room was completely silent. Even Rhiannon looked down at her lap. The judge leaned forward, hands steepled. "I've reviewed the full record," he began. "And while this is clearly a complex family dynamic, there's little ambiguity in the documentation." He turned toward Rhiannon's table. "Miss Jennings, your initial suit is dismissed on grounds of insufficient evidence and demonstrated intent to manipulate the legal process." Then he looked at me. "Ms. Jennings, your counterclaim is accepted. The court recognizes financial loss, reputational harm, and deliberate obstruction. A mediation schedule will be ordered to negotiate terms of restitution." Velma stood up and left the courtroom before the gavel came down. I watched her walk out, shoulders straight, head high, but her pace faster than usual. She didn't look back. I didn't follow her. Rhiannon lingered longer. She packed her purse slowly, as if hoping someone would stop her and say she'd been misunderstood. No one did. Outside the courthouse, it was colder than it looked. Daryl handed me my coat before I asked. Mavis was waiting by the steps, arms crossed over her chest like she'd been holding something in for weeks. She hugged me tightly, whispered, "I'm proud of you," and didn't let go for a long moment. Daryl didn't say anything right away. He just stood beside me, hand on my shoulder, until the weight in my chest finally shifted. "You did what they thought you never would," he said softly. "You said it." I nodded, but I didn't smile. Instead, I exhaled. For the first time, it felt complete. Not fixed, but whole. A quiet knowing that I had stood up and been heard. That evening, after dinner, I went out back and sat on the steps with a cup of tea. The yard was still. No wind, no rustling branches, just space. I watched as the sun dipped below the tree line, soft and gold like a secret that no longer needed to be hidden. I opened my journal, not the one filled with dates and screenshots, a different one I hadn't touched in months. And I wrote, I didn't want to win. I just wanted them to stop pretending I didn't exist. There was no gloating, no hunger for more, just quiet, because the truth had stood up with me, and it had stayed. And the most healing part wasn't that the judge believed me. It was that I believed myself. 2 months passed before I saw her name again. It came in a pale ivory envelope, tucked between a utility bill and a grocery flyer in our Vermont mailbox. No return address. But I recognized the handwriting. Too perfect to be casual. Too curated to be real. I stood on the porch, boots dusted in dirt from the garden path, Millie sleeping near my feet. I opened the envelope with one hand while holding my coffee in the other. Inside was a wedding invitation. Rhiannon and Daniel join us for a celebration of love, family, and new beginnings. It was printed on embossed cardstock, thick and heavy like money. Gold trim, a blush ribbon. The whole thing screamed image. But no note, no apology, no acknowledgement of what had just taken place in a courtroom 2 months earlier. She'd cried in court. The judge had ruled in my favor. Velma had slipped out before the end. And now here she was, pretending like none of it happened. I walked inside, placed the envelope on the kitchen counter, and took another sip of coffee. Then, I grabbed a black pen from the drawer, wrote "Return to Sender" across the front, and slid it back into the mailbox. That was it. Not because I was angry, because I was finally done waiting. The house Daryl and I bought sat on 3 wooded acres outside Brattleboro. Cedar-sided, white trim, wrap-around porch. It wasn't big, but it was ours. On Sunday mornings, I made pancakes and read on the porch swing while Millie snored beside me. Daryl chopped wood and talked to the birds like they were neighbors. Sometimes I let myself breathe so deeply I forgot what it felt like to hold my breath for years. I planted herbs in the windowsill. I rearranged the books in our living room just for fun. I started painting again. Nothing good, nothing worth framing, but honest strokes on paper that made me feel like I could still create something no one else could erase. There were days I didn't think of them at all. But when I did, it wasn't like before. It didn't ache. It was just information. A distant fact, like remembering an old address or a song you used to play on repeat when you didn't know any better. I found a picture of myself the other week while organizing files on my laptop. Taken at age 11, braces still new, hair frizzy, eyes uncertain. I paused on it longer than I expected to. "You'll make it out," I whispered, looking into those wide eyes. "You'll stop needing their permission to breathe." I never got that letter from my mom, the one Rhiannon had tucked away in her drawer. I never got the dance, the toast, the front row seat filled with people clapping just for me. But I got here, and that's enough. A few nights after the wedding invitation, I sat down at my desk and wrote a letter to Rhiannon. Not to send, to let go. "Dear Rhiannon, you didn't break me. You just showed me where I'd already been cracked. You were never the storm. You were just the weather I had to learn to walk through. I hope your wedding is everything you want it to be. I won't be attending, not out of spite, but because I'm no longer performing in a play I didn't write. I won't be there for the photos, or the speeches, or the perfect narrative, because peace doesn't need to be seen." I folded the paper, walked to the fireplace, lit a match, and watched the flame curl upward, eating the words slowly, line by line. Daryl walked in halfway through and didn't ask questions. He just put a blanket around my shoulders and sat beside me. Later that evening, I added one more line to my journal. Forgiveness doesn't mean return. It means I've stopped rehearsing what I'd say if you gave me a chance. I won't show up, not to your wedding, not to your story. You'll have to write the rest of it without me. Sometimes I think people imagine healing as a finish line, a confetti moment, a banner that says, "You made it." It isn't. It's more like this. Silent mornings, coffee brewed how I like it, the sound of wind chimes, and no need to prove a thing. I don't live in a fantasy of reconciliation. I live in the quiet. And for the first time, it doesn't feel empty. It feels free. She cried in court. I walked away in peace. That's the difference between being seen and being free.